Welcome everybody to the J3 University podcast. With me as always is Luke Miller, my co-host. Luke, how are you doing, my friend?
Good, ready to rock.
All righty. Today we'll be focusing on improvements for the stage and how we base training around that assessment. And with me is two gentlemen, Calum, which online physique specialist, co-founder of the Muscle Mentors, competitive bodybuilder himself, and also Mr. Joe Jeffrey, online physique coach. Business is the Physique Collective, both extremely smart gentlemen in exercise programming, nutrition. And these are the guys that I went on to really pick their brain because of the training they've been implementing together, but also within their coaching business. And they're very well educated and educators. And that's what we want here for J3 University. So gentlemen, how are y'all doing today?
Who speaks first?
Calum, go ahead, my man. How are you doing?
All good, thanks, mate. Yeah, I've been on obviously solo episodes with Luke, and we have one with Joe as well. I think as a trio. So I'm looking forward to getting stuck into this for sure.
Joe, my friend, how are you?
Yeah, I need to warm up my brain a bit, man. I've had a bit of a mad day. So
a long one. Long one.
Joe's
coaching clients or training? Is this post leg day?
No, it's actually I'm off the gym today. I had a piece of gym equipment delivered today, and he turned up with no, I don't know what you call it, like pallet lift or something.
To get it off the truck?
Well, it's a long story, man. I won't bore the listeners with it, but the bloke didn't speak English either, so it was like, I'm having to sign language to him. And
he's like, yeah, man, you lift. We'll just lift this into the house. Be like, no, dude, this is...
It's a 400 kilo piece of kit, and there was only me and him there. And I was like, bro, how's this coming off? And he's talking to me in a different language. I'm like,
oh,
what?
No.
Yeah, it was... Yeah. We sorted it out in the end, but I am knackered now.
So, Cal, where are you at? Are you approaching into a contest prep?
So we're just about to start, well, what will be my next off-season phase. So
okay. Me
and Joe have had, it's coming up to a year now, isn't it? After the show. I competed last in 2019. And last year saw me go from 200 pounds to 300 pounds in the first push. And now we're starting this next push I was like 296 this morning after a tidy up. So the last 8 weeks or so, we tidied up body composition, got appetite back into a good place, got my GI sorted again after that first climb. And now we've got kind of a clean slate to move from again.
That's massive, 200 to 300.
Yeah, it was a big old push, that first one.
No, because you hear that when someone's going to hear this, they're going to say like, oh man, this guy had to go super sloppy, like Dream Bulker style. What was this, like a reasonable composition?
Yeah, I think now we held the very low 280s when I recomped from that first push, and now I think me and Joe could safely say if we went for it, I could probably be ready for a show in 10 to 12 weeks.
Very
yeah,
nice.
I said the same thing. I saw your pictures you posted recently, 12 weeks out, on the nose probably.
Yeah.
And then Joe, where are you at? Are you entering into a contest prep?
You know what? I did a bit of a push this year. I've had a strange year when it comes to my own physique development. In the first lockdown, I literally lost 40 pounds, but not in a good way. I lost 40 pounds of muscle. Dude, I'm not going to lie to you. I stopped training, stopped eating, just got myself in a pretty bad place. Didn't have access to a gym. Was going through moving house, and I actually admittedly had pushed my client load way too high. Working 14, 15 hours a day, forgetting to eat, stuff like this. So this year was somewhat redemptive for me, where I'm now at about 245 after a bit of a recomp, and I was 200 then. I pushed up to about 255, now at about 245. Been just cruising for a while, got some blood work booked in for tomorrow. Have a look at that, see if everything's good to go. And then I'll probably just diet down for a bit. I'm not competing this year simply because I've got too many clients competing.
Yeah, it's nice. It's a good problem to have.
Well, the way the shows have gone is, I would have usually had some in March and, some here and there, whereas they've all been pushed back again and again. Yeah. And what's ended up is I've got 16 clients in the same show in June. So it's like, whereas it would have been like maybe three. So very stressful time coming. I bet it's the same with you, Cal.
Well, it's because we've obviously had like an initial show calendar released for the main feds over here, and then all the shows have been coupled together within like a 3-month period. So it's not really been possible to plan it any other way, has it?
No. And there's select shows that people want to do. Like that PCA First Timers in June, everyone wants to do that. The Fit Expo, everyone wants to do that. So it all ends up grouping into one. But it's going to be fun.
But this comes back from like even the back end of last year. I think there were like 3 or 4 shows that ran last year, and that was it for the entire season. So now everyone's obviously getting itchy feet, wanted to compete, and it's obviously been blocked into a small time frame again. But I'm just grateful there's going to be some shows this year, which is the main thing.
Yeah, I'm sure for you guys, like the opportunities for shows is a lot different than for us in the States. Like in Texas, we could almost have a show like every single weekend or every other weekend. It's pretty incredible, which is an issue as well because it kind of waters down each show a little bit.
Yeah.
It gets overwhelming, I guess, even on our end, because if they like my wife, she's doing it was Puerto Rico Pro for her pro debut in wellness, and it got moved to the Bahamas. Oh, damn, going to the Bahamas. But they find out if my clients find out I'm going to a show, they're like, oh, we'll do that show too. So now I have 7 competitors doing Bahamas. I'm like, oh shit. Renee's like, hey, I'm your number 1 client, right? I'm like, babe, all clients are, they're treated equally.
I'm doing the same shit with Italy right now. Like I have like 2 other people that want to do Universe, which is the national qualifier she's going to do. She's like, you got to say no. She's like, I'm competing at Universe. You got to say no.
That's my show. Well, with the talk about competition and the stage, this is what I wanted to kind of get into is, looking at the improvement season and that starting point of a needs analysis and what does that really look like for both of you and for getting into your clients? Is it looking at the judges' feedback, stage picks? How's that assessment start out for you both? Or Cal, if you want to go ahead and start there.
I think something that me and Luke spoke about briefly on the podcast interview before, where like needs analysis for a client is going to come from collectively probably what feedback they're coming off from that last show, what potentially has been, what have you got from those last potentially 2 or 3 improvement phases in terms of development and where their physique is at currently. And I think we've all got clients where you look at photos and you're like, you just need to improve systemically everywhere. And then we've also got clients that are at that niche of maybe everything's more or less there in terms of collectively looking pretty set. But then, for me, it might be, we need to focus on bringing my legs up now. My upper body's got a little bit bigger, or we're going to have more specific bias towards the programming that we're going to put in place for those training blocks. So obviously criteria-wise for the different classes that we're looking at, male and female, they're going to be different areas that we potentially need to bias in programming anyway. But I think for most clients, it's either going to be, those are the obvious areas we need to develop and focus on in programming because these areas are so dominant, or it's going to be a case of, everything needs to come up here realistically to get to the level you want to get to.
Yeah, that probably sets also looking at the training level of the individual and also the duration of what that period might be and probably I'm sure that a lot of this is setting expectations out the gate with clients because you come off a show, you're like, all right, I'm ready to move up to the national level. I'll compete again in 6 months. Like, no, it's probably not. Like, and you have to say, okay, what is your training age? What can we pull out? And what does that time frame look like? And I think that is probably a huge piece of it to build out this like kind of long-term plan. Of course, you don't know someone's response, right? What does that conversation look like for clients? I'm sure you have them at all different levels.
Yeah, I think worth noting on that as well, like Cal said, maybe the individual needs to grow systemically. The question will then be like, can they? Depends, again, on the training age of the individual. What are their biologically unique requirements for that individual? What are their volume requirements? There has to be a discovery period first before we can plan and execute the plan. Before I think we can say, well, we need to grow medial delts, that's bikini competitor, hams, glutes, medial delts, lats or something, we need to do this. It's like, well, can we even do that? And How do we even do that? We need some information first. How we set that up, of course, will be pretty basic stepping forward, but you need to learn where that individual's response is and what their requirements are first, I think, before you can have that next step in the conversation.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And so if you had someone that comes to you that has this XYZ program and you have a jump off point sort of to start from there, what are common things that you're starting to implement? What's your general outlook on setting up the initial kind of microcycle plan week to week to start having those tools to gauge and say, okay, this is what we need to move forward from here. What does your kind of general approach look like for that?
I think one thing that I've found over the last couple of years with clients, and even like the higher the caliber of client, I find it more apparent as well, is everything that's presented to you at the start is a little bit of a mess in terms of the thought process. Like they don't really have an idea of why they're doing anything. Like why are they picking those exercises? What are the flow of the sessions themselves? Like the exercise selection, and like completely overlooking the importance of execution. We'll get to that in a second, but just like the thought process behind the programming. And I think one thing that I'd probably bias doing there at the start is potentially bringing everything down to a minimal effective dose and seeing what happens, and then start to manipulate things from there once we've got that kind of clean slate to work with.
Exactly as Cal said there. I'm literally fresh off a call with a client that I've been working with not too long, but I wasn't looking after her training. It's IFBB Pro bikini competitor. We've identified there's potentially some issues in fatigue management, things like this. So she's asked if I can pick up on the training as well. So it's literally, we had the call, what are you doing right now? You know, here's the split, but it's basically like beat the life out of everything every day. No progression scheme, no planned accumulation phase, no paradigm of accumulation phase to deload. You know, so right now it's going to be, okay, well, let's pull everything down to roughly what sort of maintenance stimuli would be for these body parts, because we've identified the sort of specificity of growth that we need in an advanced competitor like her. And let's really slowly titrate up this with things that we haven't looked at before, because maybe we don't need to go all the way to pushing up volume to X amount. Maybe the first thing we need to do is just get the execution perfect with the correct movements. You know, a simple conversation like training the lats, see how I do loads of lat pull downs. You know, we're talking about the sort of spinal extension, rear delt style lat pull down. We're not really training the lat yet. So me pushing that up to whatever amount of sets with whatever accumulating intensity, it doesn't matter. So we've got some fundamental things, but even that is a novel stimuli in and of itself. We all know that's why progressive overload works, because it's a novel demand. There's an adaptation to any newly imposed demand. We might not even need to get that kind of stuff out yet. So there's going to be a titration. That in and of itself is accumulation. Almost that intra-set volume like we spoke about on the last podcast. You know, just turning that set of lat pull downs into an actually efficient set of lat pull downs is a big increase in stimuli.
And Calum, one of the things I have to pull out real quick is, especially even in those high level competitors like IFBB pros and stuff, one of the things I've seen is like classifying that goal for each pattern drastically increases that intra-set like stimuli that we're going to be able to get. And it's a lot of the times it's perpetuated with these like bro type of thought process of like, this is a thickness movement, this is a width movement type of a session. And it's like, they come to you like, I don't know how to grow my lats. And you look at their session and it's like 5 movements of upper back, right? Or it's not even anything that's going to be very close to developing a lat, especially when we start to break down the execution. Do you see that like in that early phase, like within the program written, if we assess goals for each pattern, that you see more of like a click coming on? Because like that's one thing that I do on the first setup for someone, especially for someone high caliber, is like not only write exercise with, you know, cues and reps and things like that, but associate the goal of each pattern within the program.
Yeah. It's given the, like we said before, it's like, it's taking a program that has no purpose and then giving it meaning behind everything it's doing. And I think once you've got the meaning behind the exercise selection, then that's where the actual adaptations are going to occur, because we then have a thought process of, right, we're training back today, but have we even established a full contractile challenge with the exercises we're picking in the first place? And the chances are most of the programs that are just thrown together on the cuff aren't doing that in the first place. And that's the biggest spot we've got to tick to start.
Will you guys start with a video? Like if they send you, you have someone fill out this questionnaire, here's my training program. And you're like, okay, they're doing like 10 sets of everything. Like this is probably poor quality. Do you start with pulling that back and here's your base plan to start with? Now let's look at some video footage. Or is it, hey, send me is there some video assessment done then implementing in the training plan? Like where does that portion fit into that?
I'll put some programming together, as this is where I see the skeleton change, because my programming, as Calum knows, I don't have, or rather with my clients, I don't program blocks of training in totality in the same way that I wouldn't program a block of nutrition. It's always auto-regulating and ever adaptive. So maybe, I'm going to keep using this person as an example. Maybe I would just have this bikini athlete, let's say, well, we're going to do like 3 sets of chest, but 8 sets of back, maybe 6 of that's on lats. These are very low volumes, but maybe we're going to go to like 2 hours. And so, it's all very low stimuli. But now I want to see perfect execution across the board for all of these movements before anything happens to that. So it's accurately tracking before we potentiate anything from that set baseline, and the execution footage is mandatory with clients.
Yeah. I would, sorry, go on, John. Go on.
Yeah, no, do y'all use, you have a development to where they can send it through a certain medium, like y'all use like WhatsApp or something for videos, or because, with a lot of these people that are listening are like coaches, and like making that a process efficient is really challenging. It's like, hey, film every single set and send me every single, and it can be overwhelming on both ends, right? Because you don't want to take away from someone's training or be like overwhelmed with watching like 20 sets of training per day. How do y'all manage that on just a coaching end?
I personally, sorry for cutting you off, Joe. I personally let it compile a little bit. So I'll say like, do the next 3 sessions or do the next week and take three videos for a session, or I want you to video these specific movement patterns this week. So we don't have someone sending me in 30 videos to watch, and I'll wait until they've checked in for the week, and then I'll just run through the entire bunch of, it might be 10 videos for the week, whatever it might be, instead of every single day. Oh, they've just trained, I'm going to spend half an hour texting them now. I'll just do it all in one go, so it's more time efficient. That's personally how I'd like to do it, unless you want to spend all day on your phone speaking to every single client like that, then you won't get anything done.
And people do.
Yeah.
And I think that, it's a takeaway, because like a lot of people ask us like about coaching and coaching efficiency and managing clients. And because it's easy, just like you said, Joe, like when you starting a business, to say no, for client load, and to take it on, and then all of a sudden you're working off your phone all day long using like 5 different apps to do it: text, email, WhatsApp, or all this stuff, and it can be very overwhelming. So having that efficiency and being able to manage them is extremely important. But anyway, so we have this like initial setup of the first week, right? And we're gonna monitor it. So once we have these things established, what are you tracking along the way to monitor changes of when we're ready to, whether it be increase effort or increase volume? Like what is that main progression tool that y'all are using to drive up stimulus? And I know we're continually always trying to improve quality, and quality is just a stimulus within itself. But once we have these things established, like someone that is advanced, that has this execution down, how does that block progression look? Not that we're, going to reactively or proactively program a block, but going week by week, all right, this person's ready. What are those things that you're looking for to progress from there?
So outside of set numbers, I do modulate sets up and down throughout mesocycles as according to session feedback. I use a lot of like perceived recovery, pumps, sauna, stuff like that after each session. But outside of that, I have a progression scheme in place. I'm a really anal coach. I don't like go and try and get a rep or, see if you can add load to the bar on this one. I can't work like that. It has to be right on this movement. This is what's happening this week. And then this is what's happening this session and this session. If you can't do it, there's a reason why, and we're going to work it out. I'm relatively, what's the word I'm looking for? Privileged to be able to do that because of the clients that I work with. I don't coach any Gen Pop anymore. Everyone I coach is doing this and pretty much only this. So the sleep and the stress management, 99% of the time is there. There's never deviances in nutrition. Everything's nailed. So it gives me that luxury of being able to say, here's the progression scheme. We're going to add 2.5 kilo to the bar and match reps each week on this movement. We're going to add 1 rep per set on these movements. And then sets can modulate as according to that per session feedback week on week. The goal is always to get to the point of functionally overreaching to some degree, like, or rather an inability to progress further within that accumulation block. So working from maybe, I mean, ideally the first week would like be just enough to get a response. And that's something that I've had to work on with Cal, someone that trains stupid hard and is really strong, smash the nervous system to bits in the first week, can't do much from there. So we want to have this threshold. Okay, this is like the minimum amount of work to get something. And then we go from there up, and I try to recreate that with every client. Over time, it becomes this like biologically unique, perfect formula, but it takes a long time,
And that's changed a lot for you, Joe, over these past few years, because you've done DC and basically logbook, and I've heard you speak on RIR and kind of jokingly say not to use this method, and you've kind of come full around to implementing some of these tools. So how has that thought process changed, and what have you seen result-wise, maybe within yourself or even clients, making those type of shifts?
Yeah, I think on that one, I think that's a great example of like something I've had in emotional belief, and I've exerted it using ego, which is like an embarrassing thing to look back on. I change my mind on stuff all the time, and Cal knows that I've been like popped down social media because of that. I think you're an idiot if you don't change your mind in light of new evidence.
I completely agree with you too, because I came from a background of DC powerlifting, and it becomes an identity of like, you're the guy that trains hard and you're the guy that goes all out to failure, and people like start like following you and believing you because of that. And to change on that, you're like losing this part of yourself, or people are like, oh, you train like a pussy now. It's like, no, you're just, I think if you're truly an educator and you always have an open mind to change, so that by no way is that a weakness. I think it is absolutely a strength. But I wanted to pick on that because I think a lot of in bodybuilding, we have these camps that form. They're very dogmatic, and you have like the logbook chasers that go so far into that variable that you're just chasing strength. And it's like, is that truly the adaptation that we're only after? And you kind of get looking at the wrong thing.
It's
versus
all ego.
Yeah.
Bullshit, really. At the end of the day, I'm obsessed with hypertrophy. Optimal physique development was my brand from how many years ago. I want to know how to optimally grow the physique. I don't want to look cool, screaming the gym down, or be part of whatever crew, take the piss out of reps in reserve on Instagram or whatever nonsense people want to waste their time doing. At the end of the day, you take a step back, and it wasn't agreeing with the evidence. It wasn't agreeing with anecdote from clients. So I binned it at the end of the day. And what I would find over time is that training to failure has great utility. Like, that's clearly defined in literature when it comes to activation of higher threshold motor units, greater cell swelling, greater metabolite accumulation. These things exist, but there's a cost. And within a cost-benefit ratio, there's a time and a place to go to failure. Every set is not the time, because it's not worth the trade-off to other vectors of hypertrophy. Like, volume is the key driver of hypertrophy. I don't think there's a key driver of hypertrophy. I think there is a balance of all of the vectors when it comes to tension, so load on the bar, volume, effort / intensity, frequency, perfect internal focus and execution. Some kind of perfect amalgamation of these results in the most progressive and productive training programming. And I've found the greatest utility with intensity and using reps in reserve to be accumulating from what is actually minimally required, like we said with Calum, up to the point of, yes, we can push to failure, use force reps and whatnot, maybe in the last week of the mesocycle when fatigue isn't the limiter. And this, in my experience, is exponentially more important in advanced trainees, because the nervous system cost, the sympathetic cost of Cal going to failure on a front squat is so limiting when it comes to generating volume elsewhere. There's a great cost there. In a beginner, not so much. They may not even know where failure is. And I've also dropped that thing. I used to say, I think beginners should train to failure because it teaches them where failure is. I think that's a bit nonsense as well. I think maybe you say go to 2 reps in reserve, and then next week add a rep, then the week after that add a rep, then the week after that, they'll get failure eventually.
They'll eventually get there, right? And then they'll learn effort.
Or they'll just be the next Jay Cutler. So
yeah, sweet. I'm fucking superhuman. Oh, perfect. I have a great client now, right? No. There's something I want to come back on that, on progression and changing that many variables week to week. I want to come back to that. But Cal, we brought in, because I guess you probably had a mindset probably like a lot of us here, is like an emotional attachment to training extremely hard throughout sets, high effort, going and grinding out those last few reps. So Cal, this had to be a big emotional, psychological change to even be willing to implement this. What was that like for you? And when you work with clients, do you have some clients that their psychology just doesn't even match with it, and they just won't enjoy training, and so that adherence aspect has to weigh in? Is like, you know what, this is someone I have to kind of compromise on, and maybe have some approach that we have high effort that they can, dig in on, but maybe have some balance, and we're like, hey, can we compromise and not go all out within that? So maybe start with yourself and what you experienced.
I'm probably the epitome of the logbook meathead person for many, many years. Like I've been coached by Jordan. I trained with Jordan for a year or so in Manchester. And if Jordan Peete is the epitome of that dogmatic group of like, despite any cost, has progressed, I've been immersed in that for the last couple of years. And, I think we got to a point where it's like, right, there's got to be more of a thought process here, as opposed to me just going and burying myself every single time I train. Because, the way we're approaching the diet and the way we're approaching anabolics and the way we're approaching recovery is all systematic. But the training approach is like, just throw it at the wall and see what sticks. And I was going in sessions and I was like, I know what I need to hit today, but there's no thought process to like, do I need to go there today? Do I need to pull back? Like, when do I need to pull back in terms of intensity? When do I need to recover? When do I need to do that much volume? So it was just a case of having a slightly more systematic approach to what was going on. And I think the big thing that's changed it for me is, ever since I've been at this upper echelon of body weight, the intricacies that I have in terms of recovery are massive. So I can't spend too long taking sets beyond failure before my body just falls apart and breaks. Like if I go and do a max front squat, that could take me 3 or 4 days to recover before I can even train effectively again. So like from the thought process here with Joe, it's like, right, how can we formulate something that continues that rate of adaptation, but doesn't necessarily need to equate to me burying myself every single time I go into the gym? Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Go on.
No, I just continue, because I just have a follow-up question on like how narrow that RIR window looks like for someone that's a little bit more advanced, because in my opinion, just from what I've seen, is that as we get more advanced, that RIR window of effective reps, if we want to term it that, is very narrow. And the utility in it may be just like a safety precaution type of a guidance. And I know John's spoken on this before, in like the RIR across different patterns will be different. So like your single joint patterns are to failure, maybe those bar type squat patterns are 1 rep in reserve from a safety perspective. And commenting on like what that window of RIR looks like within this, so that as we phase into why we control so many vectors across programming that I know John wants to dive into, setting that as a framework of like, what does that progress across a block and how narrow that window is.
I think it's very, go on, Joe.
Sorry, Cal. Go on, bro.
I was going to say, when I first started doing it, I didn't know where to stop. I was like, I feel like I can do one more, so I'm going to try one more. I was like, right, I'll do one more again.
I'm going to butt in. I actually think that's good, because that's an argument that people would use. Like, I don't know what 2 RIR is. Well, cool. Just take it to, kind of where you think it is. And next week, do one more, like we said. Next week, do one more. Yeah, you're going to learn what RIR it was, Because if you get 3 more, maybe some adaptations taking place here. Yeah, you know, in an advanced athlete, how much adaptation is taking place in like 4 weeks? Maybe not a lot. So you may have been at 3 if you can pump out 3 more over the next 3 weeks, or maybe at 2 because you've sort of got that one adaptation of 1 rep. You know, it's pretty easy to gauge, and it doesn't need to be so perfect. You know, the point is just fatigue accumulation, not like ensuring that rep was exactly 2 reps in reserve. It's more so just doing what you need to do that week for sufficient amount of stimuli to drive the adaptation of hypertrophy and still be able to come back and be productive in the sequential sessions to follow.
I think the biggest thing for me has been the thought process of applying that, but to the movement patterns that I know are very neurally expensive. It's like at the moment it'll be like a front squat, an RDL, an incline barbell press, a barbell bent over row, and I know for a fact that, you know, a single arm D-handle lat pull down, I can probably take failure every single week, and it's not going to have that much of an impact. But the barbell row and the hip hinge in the front squat, having that thought process means that I'm not just constantly chasing my tail, not really know if I can go into that session and do that this following day. There's more of a thought process like, no, we're doing this in a manner that can sustain that level of progression, because I'm not always taking it to that 100% threshold.
Yeah, and Luke, I'm going to agree with you as well. I think, like, from an evidence-based perspective, when it comes to proximity to failure, it appears like the majority of motor units are activated around that 5 reps in reserve. You're going to sort of accrue marginally more as you go on. You know, a beginner could train with 5 reps in reserve and get fabulous results as you get more advanced. But I would typically, with Cal, not go further away than 2 reps in reserve. And we will accumulate up to force reps and rest pauses and stuff like this. 2 reps in reserve is hard. Like, there's a lot of people that sort of talk trash about not taking sets to failure, and you'll watch one of their sets on Instagram, they train with 1 rep in reserve anyway. Yeah. So, you know, it's writes off the argument. If you train at like an average 1 to 2 reps in reserve all the time, yeah, I mean, it's probably a little bit further than you need to go. Maybe that 2 marker's pretty safe, but you'll be all right anyway. But if you actually train to failure like Cal does, it's unsustainable when you're that strong.
Yeah, I think the fallacy amongst many is the application of the definition of training to failure. It's like, and then they're like, yeah, I'll train to failure. Like, do you? Even for me, like a lot of times I'm trying to complete quality reps, and a lot of times that is me finishing my last rep, not going to a point of concentric, you know, failure where I can't continue. Like, movements start safe, like Cal, like a front squat or an RDL. The risk of injury is way too high trying to actually train till you can't move the weight. Your form breakdown is probably going to hurt. And then what are we doing at that point? Are we training movements from point A to point B, or actual training to train muscles? And that's what bodybuilding is, training muscles. So I think, you know, RIR has good application. And you said, so Joe, like for Cal, like you would start the beginning of a block, like a 2 RIR. And these are on these main compound movements. Isolation movements, we can maybe address those, what that would be programmed at. And then what does that progression look like? Because for some of these compounds, we're not going to take them to a 0 RIR, right? Just the risk is maybe not there unless it's something real braced, maybe, I don't know, a leg press or something. Yeah, how does that progression look like then for Cal?
Of course, it's going to differ sort of individual to individual, but I'll frame it for Cal's programming. So I would give the guys of like the first week 2 to 3. You know, it might be more like 3 on the front squat, like Cal was talking about. It might be more like 2 on the movements with a little bit less fatigue, higher stimulus output movements. And then as the weeks go on, again, it's not a perfect system, but week 2 might be 1 to 2. Week 3 might be sort of 1 on the heavier movements, 0, I say heavier, higher fatigue movements, 0 on the isolation movements. And then week 4 would be a similar one, but introducing force reps where possible, or maybe taking that front squat to the point where, fuck, am I going to get another one? Am I going to pass out? You know, what's it going to be? The kind of end point there. But, you know, safety's always got to be a concern. Like, we're training at home at the minute with, you know, very unstable setups in Calum's case. Apart from I saw you got that cable, man. That's quite cool.
Yeah, I've been kitting out the home dining room gym.
Yeah. all that matters is that we accumulate alongside everything else. You don't have to do it this way. You know, at the end of the day, you could do something, you know, like Dr. Scott has in Fortitude, where all your sets are like to 1 or 2 in the tank and then the last set's to failure. That's fine. Ultimately, I think that's pretty perfect in terms of not limiting yourself in terms of further progression. I just don't think taking every set to all out failure is smart.
So with these accumulation phases, so we have to say, you know, what is an adequate stimulus? And if you're starting the beginning of a training block with a little less, and you're ending it with more, like, or can we even say we're ending it with more? Because each week you're just doing more. Does it necessarily mean you had an adaptive response the week prior? How do you even know that? You know, what are you tracking to say that? And how do you know that you're adapting so fast week to week that we have to drive up stimulus so much week to week? You know, the argument of like, look, could we hold more variables constant across this block and maybe it all averages out the same?
Yeah, I think that's a fair argument. Like, we could say, hey, does keeping sets at 10 per week, is that the same as going from 8 to 12?
Sure.
Quite possibly, but I think it robs you of the opportunity to discover your sort of maximum end of things, and also how you accumulate up there from the minimum and have perfect fatigue management all the way. I think you put yourself in a bit of a spot where it's not so easy to assess session to session bouts of, you could say, the magnitude of the stimulus. You could use things like pumps as a somewhat useful example, or track the sort of muscle damage via soreness is an indicator per session. I think that's something that Dr. Mike Israel does. I quite like doing that with clients, where it's like, if you still have soreness by the time you get to the next session, there's probably a magnitude of muscle damage that's going to impede your ability to progress. So the sets on that previous session may be a little bit too high. I know soreness doesn't correlate with hypertrophy, but using that as a, you know, as an autoregulatory method of tracking muscle damage, at least I found utility in when we wouldn't take a set progression, for example. You know, we wouldn't increase the sets if there's this overlapping soreness, and the pumps were pretty good and the progressive overload was going on. So how do you know there's an adaptive mechanism occurring? The same way that anybody progressively overloads. Like, don't get me wrong, this all sounds like a bit, you know, I can see someone commenting now, like, this guy's got his head too far in the science or some shit. Yeah, like at the end of the day, like, me and Cal are just like meatheads, man. We like lifting weights, but it gets to a point where, like, if you're addicted to progression and you can't progress, you have to find a way to progress. And the trend line is the same. You just have to get a little bit more techie with it to make it manageable. So at the end of the day, we're still putting weight on the bar. We're still doing more reps. It's just how we get there in a productive manner that doesn't break you in the process, and discovering that sort of that biologically into individual. I know I keep using that term, but it's quite unique in Cal's case because his volumes are very low. You know, believe me, I'm not saying I'm a high volume trainer or something like this. I think low and high volumes are these weird concepts that don't necessarily exist. There's no definition of either. There's a suitable amount of volume for everybody. And if you're super strong, your sort of total volume per bout, per set, is going to be a lot higher. Like, I guarantee Cal gets about the same total volume on one set of hack squats that I get on like 4. So my requirements are probably going to be higher. Because I'm sure his, although like neurological adaptations do take place, I'm sure his nervous system isn't like Jay Cutler and mine's like Pee Wee Herman. You know, there's some similarities there. You're ultimately going to break quicker. I do get what you're saying, John, with like holding things stable. I think that's fine. I think it's worked well for many people. I think you can progressively overload over time like that. I just think there's a better way to manage fatigue when you're this strong.
I'll come in there and say as well that I think we spoke about this, Luke, before, where like I've got different clients where I'll keep the initial volume that I started with constant for the majority of the phase, and I won't change it because I'll just be coming back. I've got stronger, I've progressed, I'm recovering well. It's like, sweet, I'm just going to sit back and let this happen. So the program might look like the same from week 1 to week 16, but I'm also going to have clients where I just don't trust their ability to be able to overload consistently on the same parameters, whether they don't have the mental capacity to take themselves there, whether they're just not neurologically, you know, made up to progress in that manner in a linear fashion. And I'm going to be a little bit more specific about, right, in week 1, all the way through to week 4 or week 6 or week 8, this is the adjustments we're going to make. And I'm a bit more proactive with the changes as opposed to reactive on a week-to-week basis. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I guess one of the things I also would want to question is like, and Joe, this may be taking what you stated out of the framework and within the specificity of Calum himself, is the progression of variables on that so short of a timetable. Like, do we need that aggressive of a progression and stimulus across a 4-week block? Like, can we not maximally stimulate the adaptation that we're looking for in hypertrophy with more consistent variables and just progressions within session across a longer timetable and elicit, you know, probably a similar, or I would argue maybe a better response, because we're not riding this up down wave constantly every 4 weeks. Like, we're not pulling down to this baseline to our IR every 5th week, right? We're riding the variables out a little bit longer.
I don't think it has to be a 4-to-1 paradigm by any means, but I think there has to be accumulation that leads to the point of functional overeating potentially, and then leading you into super compensatory hypertrophy, because we know that these adaptive mechanisms exist that can push you beyond what the adaptation to simply like increasing the imposed demand of the resistance training in and of itself. Neurologically, especially, again, when you're as strong as Cal, it's not as simple as progressively overloading every week, because even if you're doing 1 set a week, it wouldn't take very long. You know, there's a time window here for maximum stimulus, and it's not necessarily about, again, I think someone listening to this is probably good. Okay, cool. Well, Joe's sort of talking about working from, you know, the Dr. Mike thing. I mean, I don't follow Dr. Mike that closely, but that sort of low volume up to high volume thing, it's not necessarily about that. It's more so a discovery. Let's talk about specificity, right? This will make more sense. So Cal's programming here, we've got pretty much everything on like what would be a rough, not maintenance, slightly above that for every body part. So kind of what you need to get some kind of response, but we are moving up the volume through the legs only, because we're trying to discover where that point is that adaptations can't be set any further beyond that point, because that's the only way you're going to know if you're progressing maximally, because like whichever way we want to cut it, volume is correlated with hypertrophy to a point. It's like an S-set response, right? So there's a certain amount of sets that nothing happens, and then something starts happening, it does more and more and more, and at some point it will bottom off. So I would rather have more volume with sufficient intensity, and progression has to be there as the mainstay. I'm not a volume zealot. I'm not a progressive overload zealot either. I think they all have utility, and we need to include them all. And I want to see Cal, because he's not a recreational trainer, he's a competitor. And again, I'm an anal coach, and I want him to be getting maximum. And we can see those correlations exist. How do we find that? By finding it, right? Getting the data and getting there.
You know, I think that's that discovery, and this is what we talked about, like all this needs analysis and getting into what the general, like first client, whoever that may be, is you kind of have to know where they're at, and whether that is, you know, do they understand RIR and going to a point of failure, but they also, you need to understand like what can they tolerate. Like maybe they are like Cal, you have someone that was progressing the log that come back like, hey, I beat everything, I'm doing great. Like, well, it's like, well, I guess we don't need to make a change, but what if we added something else in and you could get a little bit faster rate? It's like that question is still there. I mean, if someone's like, oh man, I'm not progressing the gym, well, let's drop some sets back and now we can get some strength progression. But now that's starting to look more like a strength training program rather than a hypertrophy program. So, you know, it's these things of making sure you're looking at the right variables in progression. But it does seem that there needs to be kind of this accumulation that happens. I think a lot of people argue on the time scale of which that needs to happen. Argumentatively, with a more advanced person, to give enough stimulus since they need so much, it might be on a shorter time scale. And to really progress that person forward, it might, if you hold them more constant over several blocks or several weeks, you might not get as much response. And that could be a realistic aspect to this. And so I assume like how, like you're not progressing up that vastly from your week 1 to week 4, as far as like number of sets go.
No, the important thing is as well, like like Joe said, we're experimenting with this just on my lower body only, because that's like the bias for the phase. So everything else within the programming is staying at the same set point it was previously. And I'm just like linearly progressing those sets. So most of those sets are maybe like 1 or 2 working sets. And then I'll have, at the moment, what have we got, like a RDL of a front squat or something, and we're adjusting the amount of workload I'm doing on those movements specifically to see where that kind of tolerance is within this phase. But everything else looks the exact same as it did before. It's just there are certain movement patterns here where we know, right, well, let's experiment with this front squat and see what happens to my quads in 8 weeks time once I've driven this up and, you know, those adaptations occur. I think one thing that people will get confused with is trying to apply that but to everything systemically, because obviously we know that's impossible to do anything with.
I think the total volumes would change in that case. I think there's a capacity volume you can get to. So if you're going to grow like systemically and you want to follow this like volume progression, that's cool. Maybe you'll get from like 10 to, I don't know, 14 sets per body part per week or something. If you want to roll like a specificity block, like specialization block for your medial delts or something, you know, as benign as that, you could probably push it up to like 30 sets a week or something crazy. If everything else is on like super low volume maintenance mode, it's more neurological, it's more sort of autonomic nervous system based rather than like muscular fatigue based here when it comes to things like that. It's the nervous system we're tempering with. And on that note, like Luke, you mentioned intensities, do they need to increase and stuff like this? They absolutely don't. Like, I just don't think train to failure every set smart. I don't think that people need to go 2-1-0, have this kind of intricate thing like that's not some like special top secret intensity potentiation program. I think it just ties in so beautifully to progression and the periodization of the block. Because look, if we have to add reps to this movement and we're starting with 2 reps in reserve, well, it goes to 1 rep in reserve when we add the rep next week anyway. You know, although there's going to be some degree of adaptation, how quick and how, I don't know. And then we're going to be adding a rep anyway. And then when we rinse it off, well, we know that we need to start at least higher than that last start point. So advanced trainees, training blocks, I don't think should ever be in straight lines. They should be up, down, but not as far down as the other one started, and then up and down, but not as far down. Because it has to be broken up like that for the nervous system to drive these adaptations. The demand is so high that the nervous system needs almost its own adaptation period, strange way to describe it. But if you zoomed out on the macro cycle, it would just be a positive trend line. But it's how we break it down to be manageable. Because someone could say, well, why can't Calum do a set to failure in the first week and then add a rep to every set to failure in the next week? Because it's impossible. Like, yeah, if you can do it, cool. No one can do that. Like, no one that actually trains to failure.
You're micro loading, right? It's like you're adding like 1 pound or 2 pounds,
which is great.
It's important to note as well, I've done that for the last like 3 years non-stop. Right. So now it's like, right, well, if that's brought me to this point, like, because I was really like dogmatic in terms of what I knew worked. And I was like, I'm only going to do this for the rest of my life. I'm log bit progressive overload. I don't need volume. But then it's just a case of like being more open-minded now and being like, actually, I'm going to, even from a coaching standpoint, I want to experience this and see what I take from it. And then that will kind of build upon my own thought process to what potentially is valuable and what's not. I don't want to sit in a camp where I only do one thing. Because like I wouldn't coach like that, so I don't want to program myself like that either.
Yeah, it's just an unrealistic expectation. You know, like, well, I'm going to add 2.5 kilos to my deadlift every week forever. Well, you know, you'll be Eddie Hall in a year, and then who knows what happens from there. You know,
just beat Thor's deadlift record.
I think the point to take out of this is the hyper specificity to the individual. Right, like that 4-to-1 paradigm may be specific to Calum, but someone like me might not need a 4-to-1 paradigm yet, right? Like, I'm strong, I'm not Calum strong. I'll be honest. Like, it may not take a 4-to-1 paradigm for me yet, or it may not take a 4-to-1 paradigm for the clientele that you work with, right? And how that looks for each individual will vary, and that's more the point, Joe, I wanted to get out of you was the specificity of the application can change across the individual, but we have these vectors that we can manipulate in a program.
Yeah. There's literally no like set schema that I could give you today. Like, here's the amount of time you could accumulate for, and here's how long you can deal with. It could be any length of time. You know, like if I had this sort of novice female in the gym, and we were just like adding weight really easy for ages. Then we start to move up some volume for ages. Who knows how long she's going to run that for before we run into issues? Like, could be 6 months. In an advanced trainee, it's not realistic. I like to be specific with the application of progressive overload. I don't like saying go in and try and add weight, because what ends up happening there is like you'll add weight but then like drop 3 reps. So like the total volumes dip down, which I know isn't that key of an indicator, but then it takes you ages to get back to where it was before. And you're just doing the same thing anyway that we're doing here, because you're adding some load. Like you've gone from the 50 kilo dumbbells to the 52 kilo dumbbells. 4 kilos, a pretty large amount of load increment in terms of a percentage. You lost 4 reps. There you go. You've almost come down like we'd come down at the beginning of the block. Now you got to work those reps up over the block back to where you were until you're matching reps. All you've done is accumulate. It's the same thing, but I don't think it's the most productive way as compared to what we've got laid out here. So it's all the same thing at the end of the day. It's just how to lay it out in a manner where nothing is left to chance.
I want to bring up a point that you just brought up in there, Joe, and pull that out, because the ones that just want to like, train all out and just do the progressions and the load, to drop like down to your bottom end of your rep range, you would have to do a fairly large load progression. And there's a lot of risk that goes along with that, because what I've experienced within just chasing the logbook and micro loading along the way is like, yeah, you have days where you drop off and then like, well, what do you do with that? Right. But then also connective tissue damage is usually the reason that I'm having to deload. It's not because I've actually accumulated some others, fatigue, central nervous system fatigue. It's because I got like injured from trying to chase these progressions, and you're chasing the strength. And I think there's a lot of application within that of putting in some of these RIR targets, and setting yourself up for success and limiting risk and injury, especially in someone that's advanced. Because Cal, chasing the logbook, I'm sure you've experienced a lot more injuries throughout that versus what you're currently doing. I would assume. I know this is kind of newer, but still.
Well, if we look back at my training for the last couple of years, and what we've mapped out in this new format is, the highest level of exposure to stress in this training block that we've got mapped out now. I was doing that every single week for years, and I'd basically do it until I couldn't do it anymore. I'd recover a little bit, then I'd go back to it. And now it's a case of like, well, if I want to progress now at the same rate for the next 2 or 3 years, I could probably still do what I was doing before, but I think the progression will be much slower. And I think I'd run into a lot more injuries as I get heavier as well. Obviously, the risk starts to increase even more because I get stronger. I run into a much more frequent bottlenecks just from the fact that I'm never kind of undulating the stimulus that I'm doing, because if we can get away with not having to go 100% all the time, but still adapting at the same rate, surely the longevity of that improves what I can get from the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months.
Yeah, no, I could definitely agree with that, and attest to it even for myself, and like trying to just dial back a little bit on certain movements. The injury risk is substantially decreased, and especially getting to a higher level. You think about these things.
I personally find I find it really hard to do that as well, like psychologically. So almost like the framework that we've made forces me to do it. Whereas I want to go into the gym and I want to be like, right, I'm going to fucking bury myself here. And I want to take this front squat, and I don't want to rack the bar until I faint. It's like, right, sweet, I can do that. But it's like, I can't do that forever. So this format just forces me to, right, what have I got on paper today? I'm just going to do that, because I know in 4 weeks time, that's going to put me in a better position than if I just went in and I gave it 100% every single time over and over again.
Yeah. And I think if we took almost if we had, what's a good analogy? Like 2 cups. Yeah. Right, stick with me on this one. 2 cups, right, that represent a 4-week mesocycle of an advanced athlete's training. And in 1 cup, you've got the sum of the productive work done, the sum of hypertrophy stimuli from going in and taking every set to balls out failure and doing, what you could do over 4 weeks. And then you've got the sum of productive hypertrophy stimuli in the other cup, following maybe a more intelligent progression scheme, some kind of accumulation in there. There's going to be more productive work done in that cup. So the sum of work done, it sounds on the front like less, like, oh, I'm going to train with less intensity. And like, actually, if you zoomed out, the sum of the work done, because of the additional volume that you can train at, with the additional
quality too.
Say again?
Quality too. I mean, if you get like do a smash front squat of one set, your quality of volume following will also be lower as well, even if it's the same amount, right?
Exactly. So it is a way to do more work, because trust me, I love training. It's not about, like, I love training hard. I've trained like that for forever. You know, we all love training hard, but I like growing even more. So, you know, frames it well, I think, in the sum of the work done, just being a little bit smarter over it.
So I'm interested to ask, like, so the communication between you two and that framework of you have a setup going into the gym, because I've had this as well. It's like you have on paper, like, this is your job to do today, your number to hit, your rep to hit. This is how it should feel, but there should be some auto regulation probably in place. What's a specific example? So someone listening to this, it's all like conceptual in the cloud, could take away. So like, say like we have this front squat example. Cal, I don't know what you front squat. Let's make you
a shit ton.
Let's say 500 pounds.
About 400 kilo, you know.
Yeah, 400 kilo. Right. So you do your 400 kilo front squat at a 2 RIR. You hit 8 reps. That was what Joe had prescribed for that week, your initial week 1. What happens to week 2? What is noted on that session to know how to move into the following week from there? What is the rate progression that you would pick on something like that? Just is this a specific example I think that would be helpful?
So when it comes to load progression on a movement like that, movements that are quite easy to micromanage load, I would prefer to use load over reps, ideally. So next week, we would want to see a 1 rep in reserve at 402.5, either match reps. You might get 1 more rep out because of that adaptation that's taken place there. Cal's a pretty good judge of that. I don't think tracking 1 rep in reserve is hard at all. I think knowing that you're going to fail on your next rep is pretty easy to judge when you're advanced anyway. So that's what we would see, a little load movement. But then even before that, after the session, the week prior, for the days following, we'd maybe take a little bit of a look, bit of a rain check on perceived recovery. What did you feel like after the session? How did you feel during the session? I didn't really get much of a pump, and I just felt normal the next day. I didn't really get sore. You know, the magnitude of the stimuli probably could have been greater. So maybe that 1 set becomes 2 the next week. But that 1 set still is 402.5 for the match reps or 1 more. That's non-negotiable. But maybe we put another set on there. And then, again, we rain check after that. I've got a massive pump on that. I was really sore for like 3 days. Cool, we'll just leave the sets there then, you know. Or maybe we'll take 1 more if you was just kind of sore for 1 day and, you know, we're coming on to week 4. Fuck it, just blaze the life out of it, you know, put another set on there or something. Very auto-regulatory as we go through. But what isn't auto-regulatory are those load movements. They have to occur on those sets.
And then correct me if I'm wrong, but that informs the start point of the next 4-week micro, right? So you wouldn't start that next 4-week micro at the 1 set, most likely, because you know that that's not.
It depends. Yeah, so if the example I gave with the 1 set where like you didn't really get a pump and, you know, just felt easy, you felt fine, I probably wouldn't start at 1 set.
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
But if we saw sort of some disruption, and then at 2, but we went like 3, 4, 5, then I probably would go back to 2, but with a little bit more load than last time. And then incrementally move it. So over time, the load is increasing. Sets kind of waver up and down because as you get stronger, sets will inevitably come down.
Okay.
So we might go 400, 402.5, 405, 407.5. Might start the next block at 405 or 402.5. And again, up. So the difference is now we're not progressively overloading every week. We're utilizing intensity proximities or additional sets to allow that adaptation to settle in before we then take that load progression, because we've already established that isn't working for Cal anymore. So we need a way we still have to progress load, right? It's a fundamental vector of hypertrophy. But how often do we need to do that, and can we utilize other things along the way instead? Because I know even people like Lyle McDonald, he's probably listening to this like, Joe, I fucking thought we were friends. He's talking about reps in reserve and shit. He will often say, like, you don't need to progress every week. You can leave it 4 weeks, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever, for that adaptation state. And I entirely agree, but
there's an argument, like if you went in and you did 400 pounds for 8 reps, that you went in the next week and you don't assume that 400 pounds for 8 reps would not be stimulating. It might be a tiny less, but it's still stimulating. But at some point, there has to be a progression that takes place. That the time scale is what a lot of people argue on. I think if you zoned out a lot of these conversations, the big keys are there. It's just, they're all just nuanced in how people are doing it along the way. I find it's interesting from a fatigue management standpoint, because you brought up this, and I want to hear, and I know we don't have much time left here, but this has been a growth phase of what we've been talking about. But transitioning into a contest prep where you already have a chronic accumulation of fatigue throughout, less calories, there's usually more energy expenditure in place, but now we have this hypertrophy scheme where there's this progression. How does that progression slow down and that auto-regulation of it? Because you can't handle the same, like definitely maybe a set volume progression, or maybe it's there or slower. How does that change for you guys? Whoever wants to hit that one.
I think Cal's frozen, so I'll take it. So no high degree of protein accretion is occurring in a contest prep and an advanced athlete. So I'm not too keen I would never run like a specificity phase in a prep. Outside of like, well, if I had a physique guy, maybe we'd have a little bit more medial delt in there in terms of like cell swelling or localized nutrient partitioning or something. But to expect protein accretion to occur in suboptimal conditions in an advanced athlete that has to go to the next level to even get that to occur slightly in an off season is a pipe dream. I'm much more interested in fatigue management, keeping sympathetic tone as low as possible to maximize fatty acid mobilization and therefore oxidization in a 24-hour time block. So training for me becomes just a vector to maintain tissue. If the individual's like getting barely any stimulus, yeah, sure, I would move up sets sometimes. Yeah, it's going to help with expenditure. People like training. But if we're seeing tension bomb, I'm not comfortable with that. I'd rather move volume down. I'm more often moving volume down for a prep to what's like minimally, not even minimally effective, because it's not effective at hypertrophy, more like minimum for maintaining, especially if these individuals are getting peeled up. I'd much rather they were putting their energy into effective expenditure, because resistance training is just rubbish at expending calories, or resting, doing something that isn't massively nervous system taxing. So specificity doesn't really exist in a prep for me.
Will you still program those kind of pre-planned load and rep progressions?
No.
Okay. So no. The goal of going into a session like this is what you did last session. We had these examples. So for next session, what is the instruction? Hey, do your best to maintain it. If we see RIR creep up, then we're going to adjust. In what way would you make an adjustment in like that situation, which occurs, right, on prep?
Yeah, exactly that. So if, let's say, said individual's going in to match it, if they match it, but they get a closer proximity to failure, I'm not too stressed, because we are going to deload eventually anyway. I do still include deloads for a prep, and I'll probably just, by virtue of what we've discovered in the growth phase, even despite the accumulation of volume, follow the same kind of paradigm that we were sticking to. I mean, to be very honest with you, like 95% of my clients are enhanced athletes. They're not losing muscle, probably even if they're not training with the degree that we modulate muscle protein breakdown and muscle protein synthesis. I'm not bothered about them deloading on a prep. Like, for the most part, if they want to deload for a month, it's not going to make a great deal of difference. That's just me being honest with what anabolics actually do in terms of protein turnover rate modulation. Not if we're talking like the latter end of prep and they're peeled up, then we got a bit of a different conversation there. But if they get to the point where they're not able to match and they're going in on week one and like hitting complete failure to reach those same kind of tension times rep markers, then for me, there's a certain degree of accepting that has to happen in prep, but moving away from that, it's going to be modulating volume down. I'm much more interested in seeing that tension max. So load on the bar kept, even if it's just one set that you do for that movement, I want to see that matched, you know. And if that moves down, we move volume down with it if we can. If not, is what it is. You know, as long as we're doing everything we can in terms of stress and sleep management outside of that window, again, I'm not really worried about people losing muscle tissue.
In that prep scenario, well, I'll use the analogy with clients, and you'll have heard it before, where it's like the start of an off season with a client. If you've got like an 18-month, you know, periodized block where we've got an off season and then we've got a prep. You know, the start of that off season is like the plane lifting off the ground, and we're slowly starting to ramp things up as food and probably as anabolics start to peak. And obviously, the highest level of stress is in that mid-off season phase where the highest point of altitude the plane's at. As we cross that bridge to prep, we're gradually starting to land that plane. So now we're starting to pull away this systemic stress from training volume, because obviously food's reducing, systemic stress in the body's increasing anyway. So like for me and Joe, I think we're going to bookmark the majority of the training stress in that off-season phase where I know my body and my nervous system's accustomed to actually handle it in the first place. That's where a lot of this like intensification comes in, trying to drive those higher echelons of volume where I can handle it. And then the landing of the plane is that kind of removal of stress through prep. So you're essentially finishing with that kind of minimal effective dose to gradually land that plane safely to the floor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think, you know, a lot of people are using this approach in accumulation phases and continuing, like, because the idea of like, hey, what you built in the off season is what you just keep doing in prep. And there's a template structure within that you do use, but you can't get carried away with it either. That if you keep purposely accumulating load, reps, sets, stimulus on a contest prep, along with the accumulation of cardio calorie deficit, that you're probably going to drive yourself into a hole. That's going to take you, you know, maybe it is a true like 7 to 10 days to pull out of. With that deload on prep, Joe, is this going to be a full-on deload that you're not running someone into, but hey, we notice this fatigue's accumulating. We have the timeline to drop fatigue. It doesn't necessitate like needing like the full 7-day deload. Is it even 7 days? Because we're just trying to drop fatigue and get you back to training. So it's whatever time course kind of that falls within. What is your outlook on that? Do you have a set day, or is it more, hey, it's just going day by day, see how this client feels, and once they're back to hit it again, you hit it?
Depends on the client, because like I said, I work with a lot of competitors, and they're the worst people for this. So yeah, Joe, I feel 10 out of 10. I train every day. I train all day. You know, even in the off season, you know, we've been these individuals up to like 120 sets a week. I feel great, man. I just train all the time. They actually feel rubbish. You know, their actual ability to read their own biofeedback is awful. So for the most part, and I don't like this because I'd rather auto-regulate. I love auto-regulation. I think that is the optimal way to go about things. But admittedly, with 90% of my clients, they have no ability. And this is no like hate for my clients. I mention this in check-ins all the time. Because I'm like this as well, or rather, I think I have been like this in the past. Like, we go back to talking about emotional attachments. It's an emotional attachment to training and thinking that you should be training all the time, really coming from a misunderstanding of the hypertrophy process and how adaptations occur, and you grow during adaptation, not during demand-driven activities, right? So when it comes to deloading in prep, I'll just put this out there as well. I prefer to stay a bit ahead of the curve in terms of fatigue management. I wouldn't even wait for them to get to the point that they need a deload. I'd rather it be a little bit before that. I'm really precious on nervous system in prep, especially if we're going to use things like clenbuterol or Yahimbi, anything like sympathetically driving. Sleep's already suffering because, you know, you're in a substrate deficient environment, or maybe, I don't know, the individual's using trenbolone or a chemical uncoupler, that whatever's happening. There's a lot of things happening that aren't happening in the growth phase. So I prefer to be a little bit proactive in both deloading before they would need to, and then even a little bit longer than they would need to. And even then it comes into the discussion of what do we do during the deload. I think on paper, there'll be marginal improvements of the individual, maybe getting in the gym and doing like 50% volume, intensity, load or something on paper. So anecdotally, again, when it comes to emotional stuff, that's been a hindrance for a lot of my clients. And these days I just say, don't go in the gym, because people that like to train hard don't like to go in the gym and fluff. And I get you down. I wish I could have trained today. Oh, that was rubbish. Nobody watched me scream and do templates on the whatever, you know, haven't got my ego lift for the day. So yeah, I think I'd just say longer than needed and sooner than needed for the most part.
So for these individuals, those extra off days, you just have them follow their off day diet plan to match. So, because you don't want to take steps back, right, and have them go way into a surplus and, hey, post deload, I'm now 5 pounds up.
But I will often use deloads as diet breaks, quite
Okay.
fun-free diet breaks. So maybe we do like let's use the 4-to-1 paradigm. Like we have them 4 weeks on, 1 week maintenance, and then I'll tend to ask them to do something in that time they would be in the gym. Maybe it's go for a walk with their partner, book a massage, have a nap, read a book, whatever, you know, something that's PNS driving and productive, not sitting around thinking about the gym.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And that comes down to just like planning out a contest prep timeline way in advance, because people are going to be like, well, how do I do that, Joe? Like I only have like, 4 weeks left to diet and I'm not in shape yet. I don't have time to run a diet break. It's like, well, this is stuff that you're putting in with your clients 24 weeks out, when we're looking at the prep timeline, saying, okay, these are the times that we kind of know you probably want to be pulling back, or at least have those tools there to be able to do so if we need to, rather than like, oh shit, can we deload? Like probably, maybe not, or we can't run a diet break. So, when Joe's speaking on this, I think that timeline's been set, and you have a good prep in tune to be able to already implement these things in place and have a client that stays on track.
Yeah. So yeah, for clarity, I'm not asking people just to like skip the gym willy-nilly and go and eat ice cream and chill out or something. Again, I'm like super anal with coaching. Everything is planned and roadmapped, especially on a prep. I've got a few guys that Cal knows, like Christian and Gareth and stuff like this, going into the PCA show. I already know exactly what they're doing right up to that date. And that's from 6 months out. Everything is planned. So yeah, I'm not just saying take time off, but I am saying be more proactive with your time off, because we all know the person that gets to the stage and there's a look that you can't quite describe that's a bit sad, a bit flat, a bit overcooked, even the skin doesn't look right, can't get full. This is this like overly sympathetically driven, tired, there's a stark difference, and I'm talking purely anecdotally here because we haven't got great evidence-based information on bodybuilding contest preps. But the more relaxed I can bring a client into the show, every single time correlates with a better look. And I've never seen muscle loss from proactively deloading in that structure ever in anybody, natural or not. So I do like to include that.
No, I think it makes sense. I think if you're getting to a point where you're driving up so much fatigue, if anything, that would be the time when you could be susceptible to muscle loss. Exactly. So that slight step back to continue having solid stimulus is likely going to be continuing to maintain muscle. Or hell, if someone's enhanced, this could be someone that in that first phase of prep, you're actually growing. It happens, rare instances. I mean, you have guys pushing more PEDs or et cetera, which I know that's a whole nother conversation. But we're getting here on time, guys. So I don't want to extend this, and take away from y'all's day any longer. But I know we kind of we jumped around on our conversation and kind of dove into RIR and proximity to failure. But all this goes back to, what are we doing to improve from our stage look in assessing the timeline? What do you need? And a lot of this gets broken down into just that individual level, like always. And, having a baseline that we start with, looking at movement and analysis and how someone's training, trying to maximize the stimulus, and that we have a variety of variables to manipulate, and not that you have the failure training program or the RIR training program. There's a multitude of variables to manipulate to cause a stimulus and adaptive response. And that throughout this conversation, it's like come to a lot of us like that we've been narrow-minded and looking at a one variable approach for too long and chasing, and that there's just much more to that. And so, I think within what I'm trying to do here with J3 University is have an educating platform, and that has to have an open mind and looking at other ways of thinking and experimenting. And that's what we are in bodybuilders, right? We experiment a lot, and sometimes good, sometimes bad. But I think all in all, in looking at evidence and science, and also in the trenches, and having that open mind, it brings us to trying to get close to optimal, which is what we're always trying to do. I don't think it even exists, but that's what we always want. But anyway, guys, I truly appreciate your time and y'all coming on here. I've wanted to, Joe, I've talked to you on podcasts before. Cal, I've wanted to get in front of you and have a conversation for a while. So I do really appreciate that. For any of the listeners that want to get in contact with you, follow your journey, look into your business, if y'all please feel free to share your information. Where can people find you at? Joe, if you want to go first, and I'll make sure I put this in the show notes as well too.
Yeah. So firstly, John, Luke, thank you for having us both again. It's been awesome. Anytime you want us, I'm down for it. To find my stuff, Instagram is Joe_Physique Collective, and the website is www.physiquecollective.com. The members portal on there is where I put all my educational stuff now. And it's not only me, it's all of the members of my coaching company as well. So we've got a guy there that does mindset. We've got a posing coach that, we've got all the mandatories for all male classes on there. We've got all kinds of stuff on there, right down to how to make cream of rice from Christian. So, all kinds of rubbish. But the forum there is great, like a wicked community, and it's dirt cheap. It's literally like, how much is it? $6.99 a month. So cheap. And it's like way better than the Muscle Mentors as well. So
we don't have any cream of rice videos. Sorry.
Exactly.
My side, as we said last time, it's if you just Google the Muscle Mentors, it's www.musclementors.com, and then Instagram. I'm obviously just Calum_the Muscle Mentors, and then the rest of the guys. If you just type in the Muscle Mentors, it will come up. But the education portal is where we house all of the kind of informative content for coaches, and then the rest of the stuff's kind of spread across everyone's individual Instagrams.
Awesome. Well, I'll have that link down below. Again, guys, thank you again for coming on. This is J3 University, and we will talk to you next time.